Hey everyone, have you ever had a SharePoint site or a OneDrive for Business account that you were trying to right-size permissions on? Think about all the different portals and the different UIs and the different areas that you have to go to check permissions, right-size them. It's a nightmare, right? Well, funny thing there, today's episode, I've got Philip Galea on, and this is exactly the problem we're talking about. We're talking about what a headache it is to manage permissions in M365 for SharePoint Online and OneDrive for Business. So we're going to talk about the problems, some possible solutions, and lots more coming up on today's episode of the Security Swarm podcast. Hey everyone, welcome back for another episode of the Security Swarm podcast, the podcast that brings you the knowledge and insights straight from the security lab here at Hornetsecurity. As always, I'm your host, Andy Serwich, and with me, I've got Philip Galea back. How's it going, Phil?
Hi, And. How are you? I'm good.
Doing good. Hey, I know you've been doing a lot of, how do I want to put it, SharePoint work. I don't know if I want to classify it as work, but you've been delving into SharePoint quite a bit here for the last 6 months at least, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. Look, I've been playing around a lot with SharePoint and like the APIs under the hood, but even more than that, specifically the permissions, because I have some of the IT guys over here and keeping up with how many users we have now. I think we're up to like 500. It's really difficult to keep track of what everyone needs access to, but still keep our CISO happy. So
Right.
we've been going deep into that part.
Gotcha. So I know you've been on the show before, Phil. So just for those listeners that may not know who you are, I'll preface this with saying that, you're the guy behind our fantastic Permission Manager application, which I'm sure we'll get into. But why don't you give our listeners a quick introduction to yourself, and then we'll dive into today's topic, which, again, centers around sharing and permissions in SharePoint Online and OneDrive for Business.
Yeah, fantastic. So, I guess to everyone out there, I'm Philip, and I've been working with Hornetsecurity for I think 7 years now. And I'm one of those IT guys who sort of started from the bottom in customer support, and then sort of cut my teeth in the technical departments. And I came through product, and now I form part of the R&D team in engineering. So it's a lot of playing around with prototypes and just breaking. It's just a lot of breaking stuff and rebuilding it and seeing what cool things we can come up with. So that's about it. But it's a super fun job, and I get to do what I love: just break and build.
That's I love the description there, the break and build. And I mean, the fact that you started kind of, doing frontline support in the trenches, I love it when I see product managers have that background, because you understand what the problems are. You've been in the trenches, right? So I feel like product managers I've talked with that did spend a chunk of their career doing support, they get it, right? And so I feel like they build better products because of that. Just my opinion.
Yeah, and I mean, I still see it, and I still get to have fun and run into the support room, talk to the guys. I still I sort of have a feel of everything that's going on in the trenches, and some of the cooler problems we can still get into together and figure out how to work. And I get a hell of a lot of feedback from them. So that's amazing. So the support team, like over here, we have this really good feedback loop. Because sort of we all speak the same language now, and product and support like really do talk to each other and create solutions for some really difficult problems.
That's a good segue into our topic of the day, right? Difficult problems. And of course, like I kind of mentioned already, I've got you on to talk about how do I want to put it? The nightmare of managing
Not the word
share
I'd use, but
and
yeah.
folder file permissions in OneDrive for Business and SharePoint Online. So I say that, and I'm curious, what word would you use?
Let's be PG and call it a cluster fudge.
There we go. All right. I like it. I like it. That's what we're going to call it. So, all jokes aside, it's a challenge, right? Just to wrap your hands around SharePoint, especially OneDrive for Business as well. But we're kind of focusing on SharePoint for this discussion. And, I take this back to 2007 for myself personally, because back in 2007, much younger and much less gray hair Andy was actually installing SharePoint Portal Server 2007 on premises, and share permissions was a problem even then on premises. And now, fast forward to the cloud era, we've got SharePoint living in the cloud, and it's worse, I guess I would say. So, I mean, I think maybe the first thing that would be interesting for you to kind of speak to, Phil, would be, I mean, the big problem that I see, and that I'm sure you see, is just the vastness of it, right? The complexity of it. I mean, how the number of different portals, the number of different UIs.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
I'll let you kind of speak to the problems, but again, a few choice words come to mind, right?
So I'm definitely on the same page with you. The thing is, with SharePoint on-prem, there were a bunch of extra tools that you could run and a bunch of things that you could do to figure out all of these different permissions, like when we used to work on traditional file servers, and sort of we could map all of the different NTFS permissions. But it seems like they didn't carry those things into the cloud. And I mean, in this day and age, sharing and collaboration it has just grown exponentially, especially like post-COVID. And we're just sharing files like crazy over Teams, over email, with links, anonymous links, and to different external collaborators. You have your contractors, and it's a very different landscape from 10 years ago, where you just had to say, all right, this guy is coming in, he's a contractor, he's going to work with us, and we're going to trust him for like 2 years or 5-year contract. Nowadays, with like Fiverr and freelancers, your files are everywhere, and the collaboration is crazy, and it's just really difficult to keep up with it as a sysadmin. So, I mean, other than the cloud sort of just carrying over SharePoint permissions and not offering the same tools that we had back then, the problem's gotten so much bigger because so many more options are there. I mean, links is one of them. Anon links. There was never this concept back in the day of like anonymously sharing a file. Anyone who can click it can get access. You had to name and shame the user.
Right. And kind of what you just said made me think down a couple of different thought paths here, and the first one being is. You talk about how easy it is to share files now, how frequently it's happening. Just this morning, I think I've shared at least three different files with various users. I think 2 internally and 1 with an external resource that we do some work with. So
and let me ask you, what are you using to share it? Because I found this out not so long ago. But are you using Teams to share these files?
So I rarely actually share a file via Teams.
I do all the time.
Yeah, but the ones I did today, more frequently, I'm just going into either OneDrive or I'm grabbing the share button inside of Word or PowerPoint or whatever, grabbing the link and sending it to who I need to send it to is typically how I do it.
Yeah. So I just drag and drop a file into Teams and just hit enter, and it's sent to one of the users over here. But apparently, like, the default behavior as Teams is to automatically create a link, an anonymous link for it. So, like, this morning I wanted to share a file with Chris, and Chris is like just round the corner from me, and instead of, I just dragged it and dropped it on his chat and just clicked enter. Instead of just sharing it with him, just giving him permission, it created an anonymous link, and now anyone can use that link. Okay, you have to figure out the link, but why? It's like default should be least permissions possible,
And that
and it's a new application. They could have defaulted to like good behavior, but they just didn't. It's
right.
these things that like irk me as an admin. Sort of, I was always like least permissions possible.
Right. And that's kind of what annoys me with the state that we're in with O365. Sorry, I can't say O365 anymore. M365.
M365.
This is the state that we find ourselves in because, like, Microsoft, for the longest time, I think 10 years now, has preached this concept of least permission, right? And here they're breaking their best practices.
Yeah, it's
You
an
know,
open bar.
it's really kind of shocking. And I mean, just creating security holes left and right with this, right? And like you said, granted, this a threat actor would have to figure out what the URL is, but there's plenty of ways to do that. It's not
Yeah.
like it's this insurmountable hurdle that they have to jump over, right? And so that kind of takes me back to the other thought I had during kind of your opening statement on this point is that it's interesting to me that I see some parallels between SharePoint on-prem and SharePoint Online, like I do with the IaaS story in Microsoft's cloud. So you think about how we did virtual machines on premises with Hyper-V all these years. It's vastly the same experience in Azure, right? They didn't add a whole lot. I mean, there's some security features, but largely most users are running VMs in the cloud exactly the same as they were on premises and expecting a different result because it's in the cloud, right? And
Yeah.
like
It just feels like a lift and shift of the old
right.
SharePoint just running on Microsoft servers.
That's
And
exactly. Yep.
I mean, it doesn't sound as scary when you say it like that, but thinking about how, for example, in SharePoint, there are two different ways of doing permissions. There are the traditional way and the modern way. So, like, if you click Manage Access and you want to share a file, you can share it with edit right or read rights. But the old SharePoint permissions coming from the old SharePoint server are still available on the online version, and that causes a lot of confusion. And I'll give you an example. Maybe you remember the permissions that were like full, contribute, designer,
Oh
and you
yeah.
could go really granular and say, but I don't want him to use tables, but he can edit this content on the site. But they still exist. Why? It's like SharePoint is split brain between the new SharePoint, M365 SharePoint, and your old SharePoint server, and it causes such a headache for us because the old permissions are hidden as well. So as admins, and even with the IT team, we have to like check the advanced permissions of each and every file and make sure that someone's not hiding stuff in there.
Right.
It's
Right.
a bit of a compliance nightmare.
And I think that brings me to my next point, right? Is that because of the complexity, because of the vastness of the different tools and UIs and portals that administrators need to use to wrap their hands around these permissions,
No,
it
no, don't get me
creates.
started on portals.
Yeah, I
There are
know.
like
I like.
11 different pages and links and URLs to get like one piece of information.
Right.
We've just ended up running a bunch of PowerShell scripts. So nowadays, if we want any report, if we want to do anything in bulk, it's PowerShell, 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 which is fine because we're really adept to it now. But I can't imagine being like a young sysadmin, a green sysadmin coming in and being like,
No
everything looks
joke.
green. Thank you, Microsoft. You're taking
No
care of everything
joke.
because it's in the cloud.
Oh, that mindset. That's a whole different podcast episode in and of itself. But I totally agree. And this really speaks to kind of like the visibility gap with the existing tool set, right? So, I mean, yeah, we've kind of talked through this point quite a bit, and it's a problem. But there's one problem specifically that you and I were having a previous conversation some weeks ago, and you mentioned this to me, and I never knew this before. I'm, of course, talking about the read group and read group situation you told
Yes.
me about. But this, when you told me this, I'm like, I remember thinking at the time, I'm like, this is kind of an egregious issue, right? And I'm kind of, talking about the issue before we've talked about the issue,
Yeah,
right? So why don't you
it's
kind of
nightmare
explain?
fuel.
Yeah, why don't you kind of explain to us what I'm talking about here?
So for the listeners out there, we spoke about the old world permissions of SharePoint under the advanced button, and the new ones, which are like the graph ones, which are read and edit. And inside the old SharePoint permissions, there are what we call permission roles. So you can share a file and give Andy access as an owner or as a contributor, as a designer, as a viewer. Now, these roles are the predefined ones, the default, but you can create your own. And inside of these roles, you can give different permissions. So, for example, read, the role called read, would have permission just to read items, view items, and read permissions, and nothing else. There's something like 30 different granular permissions. Now, here is what we're talking about, everyone. You can create custom roles with exactly the same name as the default roles, and when you do, so in this case I created a role called read. There's already an existing role called read. I assigned full permissions to my custom role called read, and I shared a file to Andy with read role. For all of the admins over here, it shows up as read, as Andy. So they're none the wiser. Permission Andy has read, super duper. But Andy has access to everything. And when we went to go and see the permissions on my custom role, it redirected to the read role belonging to Microsoft. So it didn't even show like the granular permissions that give everything to Andy. No. It showed the default ones because in the URL, read is read. So it just redirected to the default set. It was crazy. It's really, really an egregious mistake.
Man.
I mean, okay, it's a bit of not an edge case. All you need is someone who's trying to leak data on purpose. All you need is a malicious user.
Yep.
Any site owner, which technically speaking, because OneDrives are sites, then that means everyone in your company. Any site owner can do this stuff. I was gonna can do this stuff.
Yup.
and hide sharing, hide literally leaking hundreds of files, possibly super sensitive information out, and they wouldn't show up on any permissions audit, because Andy has read, and read is fine.
Right. So I'm going to start with the fact that it's not any better the second time you've explained it to me now. It still sounds just as terrible. And then the other thing here is, I mean, really, instead of read being in the URL, they should be using like, a custom like
UID.
Yeah, exactly. Something that's unique to that group, right? And so, like you said, when you actually go to that URL, it shows you the default read group. So if I'm doing a permissions audit, the only way I'm going to see that is if I actually drill down manually to that second read group, or I'm doing some sort of like custom API call, correct?
Yeah, you have to pull that out, either using PowerShell, because maybe PowerShell will have those UIDs, but
Right.
inside SharePoint, it's just the URL. So you're either going to have to do that through PowerShell, through the SharePoint REST APIs, or you're going to have to ask Andy himself to show you what he has access to. So, and that's still a nightmare because, and I'm going to say it now, but navigation is terrible in SharePoint.
Oh, yeah.
You're forcing me to go into each and every single folder when, if you want to replace my file server with SharePoint Online, show me a tree view. Let me navigate. Let me understand what folder is in what file and not have to right click every single folder to see the permissions on every folder and every file, right click permissions, right click permissions.
Right.
Give me a tree view. I need to explore. I need to see where my files are.
Right. And I mean,
They recently, like what? How many months ago? They recently added counts. Thank you. Now I can tell how many files are in a folder. Amazing. How long has it been? 10 years since SharePoint Online came out.
right? It only took that long, right? Yeah.
You want to replace a file server? It's super. I can kill my file server now, but I lost a hell of a lot of visibility
Right.
on my file sharing and on my collaboration.
Right. And the other way I look at this, especially this issue with the lack of custom UIDs for groups, right, is the custom roles. If I look at this from like a threat actor perspective, you kind of mentioned the insider threat side of this already, but if I'm a threat actor and I want to set up, some sort of internal persistence,
Yeah.
that's kind of a way I could obfuscate that, right? So that's
Yeah. So exactly on that point, again, because we have this old world permission thing and new world permission thing, um, uh, Office 365 doesn't show you group nesting. In SharePoint, if I right-click a file, manage access, and I want to see which groups have access, it just tells me the name of the group. So it just tells me members of product team have access to this file. Tell me the members who they are, because you're forcing me to jump into the admin portal. So it's jumping back and forth between portals. And then I go into the admin portal and I can see, the product team is filled with these people, but I can have nested groups in there, or I can have, forget about M365 groups. SharePoint groups are a whole different story. SharePoint has its own version of what it considers as groups. These aren't shown in Active Directory. They aren't shown in the admin portal of Microsoft.
that'd be too easy.
They're custom specifically to the SharePoint Online instance, and you can have like 10 different layers of nesting. Anyone can hide in there, and at a glance, if you're not going to go into a file, manage access, advanced permissions, open up the SharePoint group, open up another nested group, another nested group, another nested group, go into the admin portal, and then get a list, you'll never see who's inside and who really has access. So there are 100 different ways of hiding people in permissions in SharePoint Online, which, yeah, definitely, if I'm a threat actor and I once get access to your system, I'm like leaving lots and lots of different Easter eggs everywhere for myself to get a way back in.
I love how you call them Easter eggs. It makes them seem a little bit less malicious, right? Don't get me wrong, they're still very malicious. But, what a nightmare. Again, that's the word I'm choosing. But what did you say? A cluster fudge. There we go.
Cluster fudge.
We're keeping it PG. So we've kind of talked about the problem quite a bit here, right? And with the few minutes we've got left here, I kind of wanted to get into some best practices. Like, okay, we know what the problem is. What's the solution here? And really, I see two ways about it, right? We've got the native tools. They're lacking, yes. And then we've got third-party options, which we'll get to in a second. But I guess, like, if I'm a SharePoint administrator and I've just become aware of this problem, there we go. I can talk today. That's true. I guess what's the way forward here? What would be your recommendations?
I mean, if I'm going by Microsoft's recommendation, I'm going into the external sharing level setting for a site or for my tenant, and I'm going to configure only allow sharing internally. And I'm banning all external shares. Now that solves the problem of data leakage. Yay, we have no data leakage. But that doesn't work in the real world. And I mean, we have so many different departments and external collaborators and trusted external organizations and partners that it doesn't work in real life. You can't just have like one huge rule that says, ban everyone. Let's close the borders. Let's lock down. It doesn't work. I get John in sales coming to me the very next day. Because I need to share this file with partners. Yes, okay, but we just lock down the entire system. It doesn't work. And then he goes up to the IT guy, and the IT guy says, screw it, let me unlock it again.
Yeah.
So there huge rules that don't offer any granularity, any exceptions, and really they're not made to work in the real world. Like in an unicorns and rainbows organization, you just have like one site which is accessible to the outside world, and you call it like external collab site, and everyone just dumps in there, and like a sort of demilitarized zone. But that doesn't work in real life. People share
Right.
from their OneDrives, they share from Teams, they share via email, they share direct from SharePoint. It's a bit of a mess.
For
And we
sure.
don't really have the tools to control it. You can't just set one rule for all. So
That
for
makes
an
sense.
admin, it's a lot of PowerShell and a lot of trust in reality.
Right. Which then begs the question, like, is there something better? And
Training
that
your users.
right. Well, there's that too.
Yes.
But we know that's not how it. That's not how it always works, right? I can't tell you how many times, if I go back to my MSP days, that I walked into a place and a business has been keeping their permissions exactly as they should be,
On an Excel sheet. On one massive
Or-
Excel sheet.
And then
That's
when
how we used to do it.
right, and then when you actually drill down into what the permissions actually are, they're wildly different, and it's this
Yep.
rat's nest of, it's just been unmaintained. I don't get me wrong, there are those organizations that do a fine job managing permissions, but they are few and
Yeah,
far
but it
between.
only takes like one person
Correct.
to like miss an update on that file.
Correct. Now, you've been working on. I imagine it's your current baby, right? And that is Permission Manager. That's
Yeah.
the new tool in our stack that is designed to address this specific issue. Can you speak to that a little bit? While towards the end of our conversation here.
Yeah, so we saw the problem in IT a few years ago, and we really suffered through it during some big migrations from the on-prem to SharePoint Cloud. And we're like, this is impossible to keep up with. I couldn't keep up with all of it, like 100 different PowerShell scripts to give me reports and feed them into monitoring solutions, so I could see who's sharing to the outside world, how many we have, what they are, where they're coming from. And it started to become unsustainable. And me and a couple of other guys, we sat down together, and some with support, and we started designing this product, which is now M365 Permission Manager. It's V1, and it's finally out. And we said, all right, so first things first, what's the biggest problem? Visibility.
Right.
And we said, listen, I'm comfortable with a file explorer. I can have a tree view. I want that kind of feeling. So we got all of the permissions in SharePoint. We delved deep and figured out how they work with these custom roles and traditional SharePoint permissions and modern SharePoint permissions. And we figured all of them out and all of the edge cases, and we mapped them. And we came up with sort of simplified views. So show me what the permissions actually look like with all of the nesting, and you can open up the groups and drill down, and you can show me a simplified view. So just tell me who the people are, because
Right.
really and truly that's all I care about, what the names of the people are that have access to my files. And we threw everything on a tree view, and so you can sort of drill down and see all of the files, and adjacent to the files you can see all of the different permissions and how they exist, and you can sort of traverse your SharePoint sites. We added a bunch of filters on that, so now you have single click, show me all of the sharing links for this site, and one button, insta load, And that's something that Microsoft didn't have, and they still don't exactly have it nicely. It's again PowerShell and scripts, and
Right.
one button insta show me all of the external users that can access this site and which files they're accessing, and stuff like this, sort of quick visibility. One really cool feature, this one you'd like. Explore through the eyes of Andy. Well, not specifically of Andy, but of anyone.
Any
So
user. That's super cool. I'm glad you mentioned that because that's probably my favorite feature in that product because again, let's say in my examples, anyone who's watched this show, they know I always pick on Bob in accounting, fictional Bob in accounting. That guy is a security nightmare.
if we ever get a Bob in accounting, we're gonna have to change the name.
I know, right? Anyway, Bob in accounting, let's say his account gets compromised, right? I can use that view to see what's the blast radius, right? What did
Yeah.
Bob have access to, which is fantastic.
Exactly that. And because you have no idea, like, if Bob had access to a couple of files on the CEO's OneDrive, or you would have to, it's impossible to get that kind of information from Office
Yep.
right now.
Yep.
So like this, you're right. You can just go in and you can even run an export and have that list, a CSV list, and be able to see in a list if you need for like forensic purposes, or just going around and saying, all right, so he had access to the finance site that might be compromised. Let's go in and figure out what Easter eggs have been dumped in there. So that was sort of how we tackled the visibility things, and there are also a bunch of features for bulk actions, which were a bit lacking in SharePoint Online. I'll give you one example. Revoke user access. So, did you know, and you probably do, that if you reset a user's password or you block their sign-in, their old access still keeps on working for a few hours, even a day thereafter?
Yep.
Yeah.
That token sits around for a while, that's for sure.
I hate it. I hate that.
Same.
So we're like, okay, what are we gonna do? And we're like, all right, we have access to all of the SharePoint permissions. Let's make one big red button, kill him, like destroy him from all of the permissions.
Is that how it's labeled in the UI?
In the backend,
Right.
kill.user.
Man, I'm getting vicious in our UI design here.
So like that's like a really important offboarding feature that actually the IT guys suggested. That like normally we have to block the sign-in, we then have to go and revoke the access tokens using PowerShell, and we still find out that the guy has access even an hour later from his mobile, from OneDrive on his mobile. And Microsoft didn't want to address this. And they got frustrated. They're like, okay, normally what we do is we don't tell the guy and we just take his laptop and take his phone.
Right.
What else do you want to do?
Right.
So we're like, all right, let's make this thing. And these are like quick, nice IT features. And then the other part of the product is this user training, which we'll speak about now. But it's the audit feature, which we said, all right, so we want to make permissions. We want to sort of build this dam, but we can't. We have to work in the real world. So how are we going to do it? We have to empower the data owners to manage their own permissions, as they do right now.
Yep.
But we also have to sort of train them and help them understand best practices, while at the same time allowing them sort of to approve the exceptions to the rule. So what do I mean with all of this? In a nutshell, the feature is a CISO can make a policy, can say these things are allowed to be shared to the outside world, these things are not allowed to be shared to the outside world. You can create a non-links, but you have to have an expiration of 30 days. And for all of these actions, for all of this sharing, the data owner himself, so you with your OneDrive or you with the marketing site, you get an email and it tells you, listen, there were 10 files shared in the last 24 hours, or immediately. 5 of them violated the CISO's policy. So 5 of them were shared to the outside world when you weren't supposed to share to the outside world.
Right.
You get to go in, use the tool, be guided, and you get to say, all right, so I didn't really need to share this one with an anon link, kill the anon link. All right, no, this I did need to share it with John from external organization 001. Approve it, but only approve it for the next month. In 30 days, you'll get a reminder, hey, listen, do you still need to keep on sharing it with John from external company 001? Remember, the CISO doesn't like this.
Right.
But at least it's real world. So there's accountability. The user can approve, can still share, but he's signing his name. He's signing his name in blood.
Yep.
And there's his name on it that he's allowing the share to happen with Johnny from external company.
Yep, that makes sense. So it's solving a lot of problems. And for those listeners that are interested in digging a little bit deeper on this product, we've done a webinar or 2 on this, and I'll be sure to link that in the show notes. But Philip, I want to thank you for coming and sharing your knowledge on this. This is a deep topic, and maybe we'll have to do a part 2 on this at some point. Yeah. But I appreciate you coming and sharing your knowledge on this today.
Well, thank you very much, Andy. I really have fun speaking to you about all different topics, but this one's even more fun because it's new, it's fresh, it's a baby, and it's a big problem.
It is
compliance right now is a big thing.
For sure, and I just did an episode with Matt Fry, our good friend Matt Fry. We were talking about the results of the compliance survey that we did not too long ago, and surprise, compliance requirements never decrease, do they?
Yeah.
They never decrease. They always get more stringent. But with that, I think we're about out of time for today, Phil. All you watching, thanks for spending some time with us today. If you found value in this episode, feel free to hit that subscribe button. Again, if you're watching this on YouTube or wherever, we are available on all major podcasting platforms, Apple Podcast, Amazon, Spotify, a couple others that I'm sure I'm forgetting right now. Be sure to check us out there. If you want more information on our product set, including Permission Manager, just go out to hornetsecurity.com for more information. And other than that, let you get back to your day. Stay safe out there. Have a good one.